Okay, good. Let's start. There's a few latecomers, so let me just give them access. And let me switch to share my screen. Okay, so last week we discussed about the course itself, about the assignments. There are 3 assignments in total. The individual assignment, clean tech assignment, and eBiz Hub assignment. And towards the end of last week, we start talking about strategy in terms of choosing a co-founding team. So we talk about the concept of hustler, hipsters, and hackers. So we'll finish with the concepts of choosing a team first, and we'll carry on with a motivation about starting a business and so on, as well as definition of entrepreneurship, or what the what's the theory about entrepreneurship is all about. There's a few more latecomers. Okay, so let's switch to concept of choosing a dream team, sometimes known as the Holy Trinity. Trinity just means 3. When it comes to startups, last week we kind of talked about that majority of successful startups or successful companies in general tend to have more than 1 co-founders. Yeah, in general. There are exceptions, such as Alibaba with Jack Ma, but on average, most successful companies tend to have around sort of like 2 to 3 individual or co-founders in general. 2 main reasons why you need to have more than 2. Number 1 is diversification. So sometimes, and in every startups and every single business, there's always ups and downs. Yeah. So if there are diversification and so on, not both founders, or if there's more than 3 founders, will have their downtime when the business hit hard times and so on. So the other co-founders will bring them up. So in general, it's a lot harder for everyone to give up at the same time. And we'll talk about the various period which a typical startup will have to go through. There will be plenty of uptimes and downtimes. Another main reason why is the field of expertise. In general, 1 person in general don't usually have all the necessary skill sets necessary to run a business. So in general, around 2 to 3 individuals can share or specialize in different field of specialties, so that they can be expert at the various different necessary skill sets needed to run a company. So skill sets such, and hence we talked about the 3 main skill sets, which is in general most startups tend to need. Hacker, which is someone which is technical, like a good chef or singer-songwriter. A hustler, typically the manager, someone who find or gather the team together, lead the team. The hustler usually will be the CEO or the manager, and also keep the team together and make sure the team work or have a target to succeed. And then lastly, you need the skill sets of a hipster. Typically, it is the marketing officer or salesperson in general, and someone which have the necessary skill sets to sell the product or the service, whether it's a chef or some kind of technology or some kind of song, if it's a singer-songwriter. Someone has to do the sales job. So in general, most startups, specialties or specialized skill sets can be shared among multiple co-founders. But in general, sometimes you do get one individual which can have more than one skill set. So in general, sometimes hacker and hustler can be the same person, or hustler and hipster can be the same person. Less so, in more rare, much rare case, hacker and hipsters are the same person in general. So last week we talked about what are these hacker, hustler, and hipsters. In general, hustlers are the CEO of the company. They're the one which build the team. Yeah, they're the one which go on Zalo and get and invite people and keep people together. Basically ignite people's passion and so on. They manage the team. They manage the direction of the team. And typically the hacker are the technology person or the product person itself. It doesn't have to be a computer or developer. I'm talking about in terms of, can be the chef or the creative artist or someone which can have the necessary skill sets to generate the intellectual property or the product or the service itself. A few more latecomers. Let me just admit them. And lastly, in terms of the Trinity, we have the hipster. Hipsters in general will be the chief marketing officer or chief sales officer. In general, they have the necessary skill sets to go out there, talk to people, find out what the market needs, and not only that, to market their product and their service into the marketplace as well. So typically, where do you start? Typically, you can start by joining the Zalo group, which we created to help people to network and find other hipsters or hackers or hustlers. Yeah, so hustlers are generally you can find them from the school of business, and usually the hustlers are the one which are responsible to bring the team together. They usually are the team leader as well. So one individual with a hustler skill set to hustle people together, find the hacker and the hipsters, bring them together and keep them together, and assign them various different specialist skill sets so that they can focus on these things. So first scope what you need. If you have a hustler already, then you're looking for hacker and hipsters. And if you are a bunch of engineers, basically hackers, then you are looking for hipsters and hustlers to help you manage and market your product into the marketplace. Once you know what you're looking for, you can you can go to Zalo and try to invite people to join your group. A few latecomers. You can invite people to join your group, or you can go to the startup events. There's plenty of startup events happen around the university itself, even in this pandemic time. There are online versions. Maybe I'll post quite a few online startups ecosystem or events, and you can always join these events and find your hacker or or hipster or hustlers and so on, whatever is missing in your team. But you need to have specialists in these different areas itself, because no one person will have all the necessary skill sets when it comes to starting a business. But if you cannot find, if you're a hustler, cannot find hipsters or hackers, there's also the option of outsourcing as well. Yeah, so hipsters, you can outsource it to a design company or a marketing company, which can basically fill in that particular role for you as a startup. Or you can always outsource the hacker or the development, web development, or Android or mobile apps kind of development to an IT companies to do that part for you as well. So not necessarily you have to find these people, and there are companies which outsource some of their functions to other companies as well. So the hacker or the hipsters can be a company themselves as well in the form of outsourcing. So if you try the Zaro group, which we created, and you kind of find other people, you can find them, if you're looking for hackers and so on, you can always find them at the more technical university, such as IT University, Bách Khoa, The Ying University, Natural Science University, and so on. In general, the hacker tends to be the technical person. It could be a chef as well. It could be an artist and singer-songwriters, anyone which focus mainly on a product or a service. Yeah, it doesn't have to be IT related. Whereas hustler, usually the hustlers are one which go out there and find the hacker and the hipsters. They're the more proactive rather than the hacker. Although the hacker can also initiate the team itself, but in general, the role or the special skill sets of hustlers are the one which go out and find and be proactive, find the team, bring the team together, find the capital needed to run the companies and so on. And typically you find hustlers at school businesses and so on, at the various different business schools. And lastly, in terms of the hipsters, you can find them at various different design universities. Yeah. So, such as the University of Architecture, Hong Kong University, they are typically a good university to find designers and so on. But also, there are marketing students focusing on marketing at the various different school of business as well. So you can always find them in this current class as well. So typically in the business administration class, you're most likely going to be finding hipsters or hustlers in general. Whereas the engineering degrees and the more science-related degrees, that's where you're going to find your hacker. But it doesn't have to be. When I'm talking about technology, it could be a good chef as well. So it could be some of the other related university as well. So you exhaust Zalo and talking to people from other university as well. Don't forget in the assignment for this particular course, you are not limited to team members which are in the class or in the Wednesday class, yeah, but also you can have or you can use people outside of the class as well. Yeah, in terms of them earning experience, whereas you can earn the grade you needed for this particular course, whereas for them, at least they can earn from the experience. If you exhaust Zalo and university and talk to people, you can access or even post on your social networking such as LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and so on. Yeah, so in general, social networking make a very good resources to find hackers, if you're looking for hackers or hustlers or hipsters, or all sorts, whoever or whichever skill set you need. You can also join groups and company pages to network and to post jobs, or even to secure the right talent. Yeah, if you are looking for specific skill sets needed to run your company. So you can always go to startup events as well. So in general, very similar to this class or university, you're going to find out when you go to university or join a class, it's very easy to make friends because everyone in the class are similar age. Not only that, they're of similar interests. You all take or even entered the business administration department for a particular reason. So in general, it's very easy to make friends or contact or networking. Yeah. So as long as you're proactive, you don't do anything and you don't go out there and talk to people, then you're not going to make any network. But at least if you are proactive, you're going to find out it is very easy to join groups because everyone have very similar interests and very similar kind of motives as well. You're of similar age, of similar interests, of similar, not only that, you all have to do assignments and so on, or group assignments and so on. So it's very easy to talk to people and find people within the class itself. But outside of the class, there's lots of these events, especially startup events. They're very similar in a way which they set up in terms of the class as well. It's people who are interested in startups. Yeah, so there'll be hustlers looking for hackers, or hackers looking for hustlers and hipsters, or hipsters looking for hacker and hustlers and so on. So it's not that difficult to find people because they are of similar age, similar interests to you, especially at these events. So it's very, very similar to the class itself as well. People with similar interests looking for friends or people to join their group. But if once you exhaust everything, there's always an alternative solution, and that is outsourcing. You can outsource hacker role into IT companies or technology companies or engineering companies. There are various companies specialize in outsourcing and so on. You know, whatever you're looking for, you can always go out there and find a company which will offer those services for you. Similarly, in terms of hipster role, that can always be outsourced as well. In terms of marketing companies, there's plenty of marketing companies out there which you can hire to do your marketing for them. But in general, outsourcing can be a lot more expensive compared to insourcing, because in general, startups tends to be very short in terms of cash. And if you have co-founders in general, quite a substantial portion of their salary can be paid in the form of companies' stocks and so on. So in that way, cash-strapped startups in general can reduce their cash flow. And you will see that within the clean tech assignment, where you have the option to raise money from venture capital, or you can pay your employees in non-cash kind of rewards, such as share options and share within the company's profits and so on, or profit sharing. But in general, when it comes to group, most group will break up. We've kind of seen it throughout history, whether it's a K-pop band or one of the other one of the more popular pop band, from the Spice Girls to the Beatles to various different pop band throughout history, groups will break up. Yeah, so the way to work together is always assume the best, assume that you will never ever break up, but always have a plan in place in case someone decides to leave the company or leave the group. Yeah, so hope for the best, but plan for the worst case scenario. So in general, there are methodology in which to make sure that you plan for the worst. So typically in the founding teams will blow up all the time. So you need to make sure that everyone, including yourself, is vested, has vested stocks over time. We'll talk more about vesting over time later on, but it's one way to make sure that once the worst case scenario happens, such as a breakup, that the breakup happened in a well thought out way. Yeah, so in general, vesting stocks in general tends to prevent people who leaves in less than 4 years. Typically, it takes quite a while to start a successful company. From owning the large companies and taking away that large equity away from the companies, especially with new employees coming in to replace, and you might even run out of equity to give the people which contribute into the companies, compared to the people who have left and who stop contributing to the companies, owning and holding on to those equity. So there are ways in which you can force co-founders and so on, which leave the companies, to divest away from their equity of the companies itself. Okay. So that's the strategy in terms of teams and so on. So typically, you want to choose a team, and typically if you want a successful company or successful assignments and so on, having the right team is very, very important. Typically it is the biggest decision and the most important decision for a successful company is having the right team. You know, we talked about a good team with a bad business plan is still a good investment, because a good team can turn a bad business plan around. A bad team, even the best business plan in the world, a bad team can destroy a business itself as well. So typically, the first most important decision is the team. Once you get the right team, everything will come together. Then secondly, it is the business plan. Yeah, so team is very, very important. Okay, let's switch back to the notes on lecture 1. Hopefully, since now we covered strategies and so on, hopefully it can help you to form your team to start, at least to begin your group assignment. First week, we also talked about the various different assignments. We talked about millennials and so on, various different weaknesses in terms of millennial, especially with social networking and smartphones nowadays. Everything is instant. But in general, relationship and companies takes time overall. So you need to be patient. And in terms of millennial, even the Generation Z and so on, typically they lack the patience when it comes to starting a business or even starting anything. Typically, startup process is a very long and drawn out process with lots of ups and downs along the way. So initially, when you start your team, you bring the team together, there'll be an initial interest, and everyone gets very, very excited. It's the so-called honeymoon period, where you have the so-called tech crunch of initiation. But then after that honeymoon period, you're going to have a wearing off of novelty and so on, and your interest might drop, or the group's interest might drop over the long period of time. And then you get into this so-called trough of sorrow, a long, long period where nothing much happened. Every startup will go through very similar kind of process. And along the process, you're going to have lots of ups and downs along the way. So most millennial and Gen Z, the so-called Facebook generation, probably will give up in this very long, drawn-out process along the way when they don't see anything happen. Successful companies will go through these, will have patience and go through this long period of drawn-out trough of sorrow, lots of wiggle of false hope, and lots of ups and downs, lots of crash in attitude, until at some point things start to turn around and you get into this so-called promised land, and then eventually things will start to pick up and you're going to go up this acquisition of liquidity and this upside and so on as you gather more and more customers and basically make more and more sales. And you guys will see this to a certain extent anyway from the clean tech assignment. You're going to see that it's very exciting towards the beginning itself to start any game as such, but it takes quite a long period to fill out that so-called sales funnel to get people interested in your products. And there's a lot of false hope along the way. But eventually, if you're patient and you basically, if you bring things out, eventually you're going to make a sales. And once you start to make a sales, it starts to, in general, will snowball, and you start to make more and more sales, and you get into this so-called upside as well. So this process, this so-called startup process, is quite common in every single startup. There's always a long, drawn-out trough of sorrow, and there's lots of ups and downs along the way. That's why more than one co-founder in the team, especially when you diversify yourself away, when someone's down, maybe the other co-founders will be able to bring them up as well, because there will be a lot of ups and downs during the process, the whole process itself. So why? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to go through this long, drawn-out process with lots of sadness and sorrow along the way? And why here in Vietnam? Vietnam is one of the fastest growing countries in the world. It's one of the fastest growing countries in the world for various different reasons. So you should not ask yourself, why now, why Vietnam? You should ask yourself more so, why not Vietnam? Why not now? Vietnam is here. It's in the center of this circle. This is a globe. So if you convert this into a sphere, this will look like a circle. It's just that the projection and so on. So this is just a circle. Within this circle around here, with Vietnam towards the center of this, almost towards the center of this circle, there are more people live in this circle here than the rest of the planet, the rest of the Earth itself. So basically, you see here, this circle contains India, which has 1.4 billion people. China is another 1.4 billion people. You got Japan, 120 million people. You got Indonesia here. which is about 200, 300 million people. Vietnam's 100 million, Philippines 100 million. You got Burmese and Bangladesh and Pakistan. All these are basically some of the most populous country in the world. Compare that to the rest of the other continents. You know, there's these countries in general do not contain a lot of people. All of that, Australia, for example, there's only 20 million people in Australia in total, even though the landmass might be big. But the country is mostly desert and so on, and there's not a lot of people. Most people live along the coast here in Australia, but in general, it's very low population density overall. Same as in Canada and Russia and so on. These are very low density populated country. Greenland, same thing. So in general, majority of the world's middle class or consumers lives in this circle, and towards the center is Vietnam. You know, in terms of exporting consumer products or middle class products, the potential here is very big. Vietnam is right in the middle of it. So in terms of export or transport and so on, it is very close to where the market are. So it will be this circle will be the biggest consumption zone due to the number of people, and home to majority of the world's middle class in a very short-term future. But not only that, most of the country in that circle, the Asia circle, basically developing country, you know, whereas Europe and so on and North America, they are developed country, whereas here is developing country. Most people or consumers in North America as well as Europe, in general, they all have basically already have consumer products. So typically in North America, most people will have cars, washing machine, refrigerators, and so on. Yeah, in Europe, very similar. Most people have most family probably have 2 cars in a household, refrigerators, washing machine, maybe even dishwashers, and so on. There might be some family who might not have some of these consumer products. Yeah, so some of the former Eastern European kind of country, such as, for example, Hungary, Poland, and Romania, and so on, compared to the Western European country, most Western will have, or similar to North American countries, they will, all their consumer products will be saturated overall. If anything, they buy a new washing machine or a new car to replace their old car in general. For them, most people already have a lot of the consumer products. Whereas in Asia, where the majority of the populations are, and the majority of the population are still within the development or developing or moving towards the middle class in general, not all of them have washing machine, not all of them have refrigerators and so on. So the potential growth, especially in consumer products itself, is much, much larger, you know, because not everyone already have refrigerators and so on. And the population is quite high as well. So the potential for growth is substantial. So you see here, the potential or the market in North America is about 5.5 trillion with a potential growth to 5.6 trillion, yeah, because of the 300 million people in the US, you've got Mexico, you've got Canada, and so on. In Europe, the potential there, or the market there, is worth 8.1 trillion, with a potential for an extra 3 trillion on top of that for people to buy or even have consumer spending. Whereas in Asia, it is a still developing region itself with huge number of population density. Currently, it's about $5 trillion US, but has a potential growth. Because not everyone has refrigerators and washing machines. It will have a potential growth up towards $33 trillion US. So the potential in Asia itself, with Vietnam towards the center of this region itself, is very, very high. Yeah? For now, we can ignore Australia, which only have about 20 million people, as well as New Zealand, that only have about 5 million people in total. So there's not a lot down here. Majority of the density of the population is around sort of like Southeast Asia or Central Asia itself, yeah, or South Asia itself, this region here with the highest density of people. But Vietnam also has big potential as well, especially Vietnam only recently joined the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and not only that, beginning to open its marketplace to start trading with the rest of the world. So hence, Vietnam is one of the fastest growing countries in the world since it joined the World Trade Organization. But in addition, more recently, Vietnam has joined a lot of other free trade agreements with the comprehensive, formerly it was the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but since the US has withdrawn from it when Trump became president, he withdrew US out of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. But now with Biden, President Biden, now they want to re-enter this so-called TPP talk once more. So the potential is very, very high for Vietnam, especially in this free trade agreement. The country which has the least development tends to profit the most, or tends to be developed the fastest in any free trade pact. Because typically a lot of the low-cost labor will shift towards a low-cost country, such as Vietnam and so on, and a lot of the manufacturing will move to the low-cost labor countries, such as Vietnam. So in this so-called free trade agreements, such as the comprehensive and progressive agreements, Trans-Pacific Partnerships, Vietnam will grow the fastest in this particular trade pact. Separate to that, Vietnam recently have entered agreed on the EU, the European Union, and Vietnam Free Trade Agreement. That is being signed, and slowly it's been ratified into law, and eventually it will kick in as well. Separate to that, since UK has left the EU through Brexit, the UK have already, in a very substantial, in advance kind of process when it comes to agreeing a free trade agreement with Vietnam as well. So this is a bilateral free trade agreements. Vietnam currently have a bilateral free trade agreements, not only with the UK, but also with South Korea as well. But in addition, Vietnam is part of this so-called ASEAN economic community. The ASEAN contains the Southeast Asian nations, as well as the Eurasia free trade agreements. Eurasia is just this so-called center Asia kind of countries, from Russia to Belarus to Armenia, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. So you see here, Vietnam has joined a lot of these free trade agreements. A lot of it is in place, except for the dotted line here, the RCEP, which is basically the regional comprehensive economic partnerships, and that's with China and quite a lot of other countries. That is still under negotiation at the moment. All the thick lines are the ones which pretty much been signed and currently being ratified into law of the countries, so that a lot of these will kick in. Once these kick in, yeah, you can see most of these countries, most of these flags, you see that Vietnam will be one of the least developed countries in this various different trade pact. Yeah, so since it's least developed, made in Vietnam product will have a cost advantage due to not only the free trade or the preferential market access, but product manufacture and produce in Vietnam is going to be a lot cheaper overall. So over goods compared to other countries outside of free trade agreement pact. So currently Vietnam have signed quite a lot of free trade agreements, and it covers almost 80% of the world's GDP. So have access or free trade access, no tariff and tax and so on. Actually, not zero tax, but maximum of 5% tax on majority of products, up to 95% of products within these free trade agreement regions and so on, has to have a very low amount of tax. Yeah, maximum any country can assign or charge any other country is 5%. So that's 55 partners, including all the G8 members and the majority, 15 of the G20 country. So that's almost 3/4 of the G20, the 20 largest economy itself. So potential here for Vietnam to increase and become the factory of the world is very, very high, especially with all these free trade agreements. So in addition, not only the potential for the market in terms of middle-class Asian market itself, and all these free trade agreements and so on, Vietnam is some of the best location in terms of startup hub or even start a startup. Yeah? The cost of starting a startup or a enterprise within Vietnam is one of the cheapest in the world. In Ho Chi Minh City itself, there's about 9 million or 13, 14 unofficial million people in total. In general, it has a very unique startup culture. For those who are, or for foreign students, before coming to Vietnam, and when you do come to Vietnam, in general, you will see a stark contrast compared to a European country. So let's just do a quick search, picture search on a typical street in Vietnam, or Saigon, for example. So Ho Chi Minh City street. So a typical street in Vietnam, what we will see once the internet loads, I'll just click on a picture. You can see a typical, most Vietnamese will see this as normal. There's nothing strange about it. But most European country, most European students or foreigners in general will see it very, very strange. Yeah. So first of all, you can see all these wires and so on. Most European country in general, a lot of these wires will be buried. Vietnam or Saigon is currently burying all their wirings, and hence the skyline has changed more recently, has changed quite a lot. And you won't see as many wires in Vietnam or in Saigon nowadays. Most roads now have buried all their wiring. But one other thing which are strange with a foreign eye is basically every single ground floor building, there is some kind of business. There are shops next door to each other. People live upstairs in general, but every single ground floor will be a business of some form. And hence, it's not only city centers, you know, but in residential centers, residential places as well. Every ground floor is some form of business, some kind of retailing or some kind of manufacturing or some kind of sales and so on. So hence you see business signs everywhere. Most Vietnamese will see this as normal. But let's look at a street in say Bristol. Yeah, most of you guys are on the course with University of West England. University of West England is located in Bristol City. And some of the foreign students and so on will not, in general, maybe not city, but let's just do Bristol Street. Will not be that much different when you click on a picture in a European country or European street itself. So this is King Street in Bristol. You can see here most ground floor is not necessarily a business of any form. I think this is a residential area. So in general, you cannot own a business or you cannot have a business on the ground floor. Here's another picture of a European kind of street. There are some business on the ground floor here, but this is in general things like city centers or near to the city centers in general. But when you have a residential street, here's a typical British residential street. You can see there's no businesses at all on the ground floor. There's only residential houses around here. Yeah. Typically in Vietnam, most street, even residential street, you see some kind of business happening on the ground floor of every single building, or almost every single building. I think typically in Germany, same thing. Residential areas, you're not allowed to have businesses. And if you see businesses, you have to go to the city center in general to see businesses. So Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon itself It's a very good location to start a business. Business is everywhere. Everyone basically are surrounded by business. If not on the ground floor, there are people retailing on the streets and so on, selling banh mi or pho and so on. The business is everywhere in Vietnam. So it's a unique business or startup culture itself. You are exposed to business everywhere or retailing everywhere. It's a great value, a good climate, and has a solid entrepreneurial community because basically businesses are everywhere, including residential areas as well. But the only problem, major problems, the cons, is the hiring process. Because Vietnam is a fast-growing economy. Most people 20 years ago come from the countryside, from a group, agricultural or agrarian kind of economy. So city centers, manufacturing, most of the things you see with a fast-growing country are relatively new to a lot of Vietnamese in general. So a lot of training needs to be done. People are not trained or if they are trained, there's going to be a shortage of very well-trained people for various different sectors within the industry itself. So the hiring process can be, if anything, is the main pitfall. There will be a shortage of skilled labor, not because of education or anything like that. It's just because the demand for people working in factories and well-trained workforce are so high, because the country or the economy are growing so quick that any good, well-trained employees are usually be taken up by a big company somewhere here in Vietnam. The cost of starting a business in Vietnam or Saigon is relatively quite cheap. Cost of living here is very, very cheap compared to European country or even to US country. Salaries are very low, but in general, not only salaries are low, the cost of living are very low. So people can maintain a low cost or low salary because the cost of living is very low in terms of rental and food and living in general. The costs are very, very low. It's a real city for bootstrapper. We'll talk about bootstrapper in a moment. To get a business up and running, it can be very cheap overall as well in terms of overheads and so on. What to expect in Ho Chi Minh City is a young workforce. Most people in Vietnam, and we'll talk more about age later on, but most people in Vietnam are of something like 70% of the workforce or the population in Vietnam are below the age of 30 years old. So it's a very young workforce. Fast, vibrant, well-educated country with fierce work ethics. If anything, the Vietnamese are compared to the South Korean or the Japanese. They're very hard working, work ethics, and a very strong motorbike culture. You see motorbikes everywhere. So a typical street in Vietnam, or even Ho Chi Minh City, you see motorbike. So you see here, picture, every single picture has a motorbike in it. I'd be surprised if I can find anyone can find a picture which does not have, of a street in Vietnam, which does not have a motorbike. maybe this street. That's just a marketplace. I don't think motorbikes are allowed. But I think if you zoom in, maybe you find a motorbike somewhere. But in general, it's motorbikes everywhere in Vietnam, unlike European street. Okay, bootstrapper. What is bootstrapping? Bootstrapping is a situation where the entrepreneur starts a company with minimum amount of capital and attempt to use the revenue from the company itself to reinvest in into the companies. So basically the capital, not only the initial capital, but they use the revenue to reinvest into the company itself. So attempt to build a company from personal finances or from friends and family, as well as the operating revenue of the company itself. Yeah, so not everything is financed by capital. There is a feedback of operating revenue into the company itself. Yeah, by doing so, the amount of capital can be much, much lower. So how is that different from a typical company? So if we bring up clean tech assignment, let's play as an individual. So typically, most startups in general will finance themselves using capital. So this is just the amount of cash from your personal finance as you sit in the corner, or from your friends and families overall. When we talk about bootstrapping, is that you use that to generate operating revenue, in other words, sales, and then you feed back into the company itself. You don't use external financing or borrow money from banks or venture capital or even IPO the company itself. All your capital, the companies are built not from only capital of the initial investment, but also from the sales or the operating revenue from the company itself. Because the cost of living, the cost of salaries in general in Vietnam can be very, very low. In general, bootstrapping can be effective. So comparing using, the alternative is to use venture capital. Bootstrapping can be beneficial as the entrepreneur is the only stock or the shareholder of the companies, is able to maintain full control, 100% control over all decision. But the downside to bootstrapping is the bootstrapping financing method in general tends to limit the growth rate of the company itself. So this form of financing may place unnecessary financial risks, not only entrepreneur, but may not provide enough investment, especially for very fast growing companies. Yeah? Whereas if you access the venture capital to borrow money to grow from this borrow money, you give away a portion of the company to the venture capital, to investment companies itself. Whereas bootstrapping, you use a minimum amount of capital a lot of financing from the companies will come from its operating revenue, but you maintain full control as well as full decision of the company itself. Yeah. Whereas if you sell part of your company to venture capitalists to borrow money, you can grow faster, but you have to give away a portion of your company to the venture capital companies itself. Yeah, so bootstrapping is just a low startup cost or low method to start your company. Vietnam is a very young country overall. Opportunities still very high for Vietnam. Here we compared Vietnam to United States. You can see here, Vietnam, a lot of people are still below the age of 30. So 70% of the population are below the age of 30. Let me just zoom in. Can I zoom in on here? Thought I would be able to zoom in. Oh. No, I'm not. Don't seem to be able to let me zoom in for some reason. Okay, Vietnam is still in this so-called golden population structure, whereas the majority of its population, so that's between the age of 55, so above 55 that's retired, so these are retired people, below 55 and above 16 years old, yeah, so of the working age, yeah, so majority of the population is of the working age and currently in employments or basically productive and basically supporting the people which is in retirement above 60, that these people are in retirement, they're not in the workforce, as well as people too young to work, yeah, so 15 and below, these are too young to work as well. So Vietnam is in a very lucky situation where people who are too young or too old to work basically are, the numbers tends to be quite small compared to the people in employment or currently in production or being productive within the economy. Compare that to the US, Germany or European, most Western European countries, they're going to be very similar kind of profile, where majority of the people in majority of the population are people in retirement or too young to work compared to people in the workforce. In the workforce, the number of people working is a lot less. Yeah? And as the population get older and older, as this start to increase, you get this waste going into the area where the workforce is. You can see that there's less people in work supporting more people out of work. So in other words, in retirement age or too young to work. So Vietnam is still in this so-called golden population where there's more people of the working age compared to people outside of the working age, too young or too old. Whereas most older countries, Western Europe and US, the situation getting worse and worse. There are more people out of work, in other words, retired or too young to work, compared to the people of the productive age where they are having a job and producing for the economy itself. So according to the United Nations, Vietnam will keep this so-called golden population structure. It will last another 30 years or so before this lump of populations start to get too old to work themselves and get into retirement age. So Vietnam got another, looking forward for another 30 years before this so-called baby boomers start to become too old to work or into retirement. So Vietnam now has about 61 million people of the working age. That is 66% of the population. are of the working age. Yeah, the 33% or 34% are in retirement or too young to work. So Vietnam is in a very good situation. Not only the potential for huge market growth, because not everyone has the consumer products. The picture to be the factory of the world as well, with all these free trade agreements already been signed and currently being implemented. It will kick in quite soon. Very good startup kind of environment, relatively quite cheap, lots of opportunities and so on. As well as a very young workforce. Yeah, there are more people of the working age compared to not of the working age, too old or retired or too young to work itself. So the situation is really good in the sense that the situation is not only the market is big, especially with free trade and a widening middle class, but also the number of people who's willing or who is able to contribute into the economy as well. So the potential is there. The potential is quite huge in Vietnam, yeah, compared to other developing countries itself. Okay, let's check the time. We will take 15 minutes break, and then we'll come back after the break and continue. Okay, let's get back to the lecture. Before we start, I want to do a quick voice check. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let's continue where we left off. So before the break, we talk about Vietnam and its prospects, especially when it comes to entrepreneurships and startups and so on. Prospects is very good for Vietnam. If anything, Vietnam, one of the fastest growing country in the world. If not, in most years, it is the fastest growing country in the world in terms of economy. Mainly because of the various different economic structure which Vietnam has, such as a very young workforce. 70% is below the age of 30, up to almost 70% are in or of working age. So majority of people are in the workforce at the moment, helping to contribute into the economy. It's in the center, one of the very populous or densely populated region, with many or potential access to all these potential new middle class, recently made middle class. So not everyone will have consumer product yet. So potential to produce consumer products for country within that region is huge. Up to a potential up to 33 trillion US dollar in terms of consumer products still needed to be manufactured for the new middle class. Vietnam is open up to the world in terms of trade. Vietnam has not, it's still a relatively quite young country in the sense that it has only recently opened to world trade in 2005. But since then, it has grown very, very fast. And in addition, it has joined on to all these free trade agreements, having access to a lot more country. But not only that, because of free trade, Vietnam products or product made in Vietnam has become more and more competitive, especially low cost products, electronic products. A lot of the new technology or electronic product manufacturing has recently moved to Vietnam. Vietnam currently biggest export product is mobile phones and mobile phone components, as well as electronic components and computer components. Over a very short period of time, Vietnam has moved away from agricultural products and raw materials such as oil and gas and so on. And now their biggest export products are mobile phones or smartphones and electronic products. In addition, in terms of business and startups, as well as a good, well-educated workforce and so on, the only problem, the major con, and even though I run a lot of business here in Vietnam, I do come across these problems on a regular basis, is because because the country is growing so fast that finding the right people or the people with the necessary skill sets can be very, very difficult, because in such a short period of time, new sectors were created, so the workforce has not been or has not many years to be trained to fill in these sectors itself. So there's a shortage of very skilled workforce for the specific roles and so on. So the potential is there. Vietnam is still a very young workforce and so on. As we can see, and we kind of seen that before in the US, after the Second World War, we had the the blip of the baby boomer. And then 30 years after the baby boomers, we had the echo of the baby boomers. So the baby boomers became or grown to childbearing age, and they have children of their own. So these are the children of the baby boomers. Vietnam has a baby boomer period as well, back in the 1970s and early 1980s. We yet to see the echo of the baby boomers itself. So here, they're within the childbearing age at the moment, and we yet to see the children of the Vietnamese baby boomers. Okay, let's move on. We will cover entrepreneurship in the 21st century. Hopefully you are well motivated that Vietnam is a good place as any to start a business. Opportunities there. The whole economy is growing. So anything you do in a growing economy, you go up with the high tide. You know, everything goes up at the same time. So next we'll cover entrepreneurship, entrepreneurial revolution. We'll cover the definitions as well as the cultural effect, Vietnamese culture on entrepreneurship, and how or what are the pros and cons, what are the weaknesses and the strength of being a Vietnamese and being an entrepreneur or being an entrepreneur in Vietnamese environment. And then we'll cover entrepreneurship, evolving concepts, as well as entrepreneurships and social entrepreneurships and so on towards the end. Okay, so before we start anything, we need to start with definition. Entrepreneurship is a very difficult topic to teach. Similar to innovation as well. They're very difficult topics to teach because this covers so many different sectors. You know, you can be you can start a business, or you can be an entrepreneur in any sectors. You know, from biochemistry to musician to movie to technology companies. It covers all sectors. So hence, sorry.
I think you are not sharing your screen.
Ah, sorry about that. That's a good point. I knew I'd forgotten something. Okay, can you see my screen now? It's coming up now.
We do, thank you.
Okay. So let me just quickly go through what I just mentioned earlier. Basically, Vietnam opportunity is quite large because of the middle class. And a high population density, but not only that, the potential for the consumer spending, because there's still people which needs a washing machine and refrigerators and so on. So potential is quite high, 33 trillion US dollar compared to other parts of the world. Yeah. So Asia or around, so like this region has huge potential. On top of that, Vietnam joined in the World Trade Organization in 2005. Its economy exploded after it became a member of the World Trade Organization. Since then, it has signed a lot more in terms of free trade agreements. So now it has access to a lot of more trade. Yeah, so we will see that explosion in 2005 or 2007 or so. We will see that explosion again once all these free trade agreements is enacted. Vietnam is very good in terms of entrepreneurship environment. low-cost workforce, lots of opportunity. We'll go through a lot more of the opportunities later on. One of the biggest problem is just the hiring the people. In general, the demand for people to work in factories and so on, there's such a big demand that you're not going to find the right people with the right skill sets. Yeah? So the competition tends to be very high, especially for the workforce. It is a young country with majority of the population of working age contributing into the economy. Compare that to an older country such as the US, where you see a lot more of the people in retirement, and a lot more in terms of people too young to work itself. So a smaller workforce supporting people out of work, whereas in Vietnam, a greater workforce supporting a smaller number of people out of work. So now we will cover the entrepreneurship revolutions and so on with definitions and so on. Later on, we'll cover entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurships, as well as evolving concept of entrepreneurship. So before we start anything, we need to talk about definitions. Before we start on definition, entrepreneurship is a very difficult topic to teach. It covers all topics. And that's why in this particular course, you have to do web development, mobile app developments, and so on. It covers everything, all topics, and so on. Because any topics, any subject, any sector can be a business itself. Yeah. So in this course, I cannot teach everything. I'll try my best, if possible, if such a thing is possible. But in general, I have to generalize, because I cannot go into specific area or topics or sectors and so on, because there's an infinite number of sectors and topics which entrepreneurships and startup can cover. So the first definition we will cover is the Schumpeterian creative destruction. It's named after Joseph Schumpeter. He's Austrian economics. Back in the 1930s, he came up with this concept of creative destruction. So definition of entrepreneur, there is so many definitions. There's no one definition of entrepreneurship. Yeah, so be careful with that. We'll go through quite a few. Just allow you just to understand the general form of what entrepreneurship or definition of entrepreneurship is about. So an entrepreneur, according to Schumpeterian, this is a definition back in the 1930s, so it's quite old, but it's a classic definition of entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is a person who destroys the existing economic order by introducing a new product and service, by introducing new method of production, by creating new form of organization, or by exploiting new raw material. So there is some kind of destruction or destroying the old and replacing it with the new. You destroy old technology or less efficient technology, and you replace it with a new business or new method of production of some sort, which is better compared to the old. So it's not a very nice description, but that's what reality is all about. You are creating something, by creating something new, more efficient, you are replacing or destroying the old itself. So maybe a nicer version, a definition. This is a shorter definition. There's no word, we won't use the word destruction or destroy in this definition. An entrepreneur is a person who perceives an opportunity and create an organization to pursue this opportunity. So here it's just saying you are doing something new or something to be productive in the economy. There's no destruction of the old here in this case. So that's two definitions. There will be a lot more. We'll cover a few more. In this course, it's called Entrepreneurships and Small Business Management. So we need to differentiate what's the difference between the two? We talked about entrepreneurship tends to focus more on innovation and profitability and sustained growth, whereas an existing business or a small business owner tends to focus more on managing the business by expecting stable sales and profits and growth overall. So entrepreneurs tends to be the early stage, try to focus more on growth or sustaining growth, whereas existing business tends to just keep everything nice and stable with sales or profit or growth overall. Another definition for entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is more than just a mere creation of business. It's about seeking opportunity, taking on risks. We'll come back to this word again. This is very important. When you starting a startup or doing entrepreneurship, you need to learn to take on this thing, yeah, which we call risk. So you see this word appearing again and again later on, but it's not risk in the sense of gambling. It's more in terms of taking calculated risks. Maybe taking calculated risks may be a better description. Beyond some kind of security. Or having a tenacity to push an idea all the way into reality. So patience is very, very important. Like we kind of seen before, the process in terms of startups and so on can be a long drawn out process with lots of ups and downs along the way. So it's a long process. There'll be period of downs, period of ups and downs along the way before you become successful overall. So it's hence there is a need for tenacity to push the idea all the way to reality. If you give up towards the beginning or at the first problem or the first issue, then you're never going to start a successful business. Entrepreneurship is an integrated concept that permeates an individual business in an innovative manner. Yeah, so innovation and risk usually will come hand in hand when it comes to the definition of what entrepreneurship is all about. Let's look at another definition. Like I said, entrepreneurship is there's no one definition for it. There's quite a few different versions. Entrepreneur is basically derived from a French word, entrepreneur. Entrepreneur, it's just basically is a verb meaning to undertake. Yeah, so an entrepreneur is one who undertake to organize, manage, and assume the risk. Yeah, here's that word again, the risk of a business. Although there's no one single definition which fully describes what entrepreneur or entrepreneurship is about, no one profile can represent today's entrepreneur. Research is proving and basically increasing to allow you to have a sharper focus on what entrepreneurship is about. But in this course, we can only generalize. We cannot cater for every single student because each one of you, each group will have your own unique business plan and a unique subject area as well. Yeah, so there's no one way to teach entrepreneurship, but I will try my best in this course. Okay, here's another definition of entrepreneurship. We'll come back to this guy, Ronstadt, and he is one of the biggest contributor in terms of research in entrepreneurships. We'll come back to his name again. I think he recently passed away this past week. He's from Holland. He's a Dutch researcher. spent most of his life, or biggest contribution in terms of entrepreneurship or business and culture overall. But he has a definition for entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is a dynamic process of creating incremental wealth. This wealth is created by individuals who assume major risks, the word again, risk, in terms of equity, time, and or career commitment, or providing value for a product or a service. The product or the service itself may or may not be new. It can be just a better widget compared to existing widget overall. It's just a replacement. It doesn't need to be a new invention. It doesn't need to be unique, but the entrepreneur must somehow infuse some extra value, whether it's better efficiency or better marketing or better color or better design and so on, by securing and allocating the necessary skill sets as well as resources into this product or new product, or it doesn't have to be new, but it can, this product or service itself. Before we go on to the integrated definition, maybe I'll switch media. Like I said, online classes and so on. Sometimes people or students do get fatigued with online classes. So I always want to kind of mix in other media as well. So let me mix in some YouTube videos. Hopefully it changes things, makes things a little bit more fresher. Let me just play a definition of creative destruction. Joseph Schumpeter's definition of creative destruction. And then after YouTube video, we'll cover this integrated definition. Like I said, there's no one definition. There's so many different definitions for entrepreneurships. Okay, let me check, make sure I'm on mute so that you won't get any echo. And I'll turn on subtitle as well. Let me do that now. Can you hear the YouTube video? Someone please respond. I had this problem before. Let me just switch to tab. Maybe if I share tab is a lot better. Let me know if you cannot hear the YouTube video, okay?
Hello, from the future here. Today, we'll be talking about creative destruction and the law of innovating large firms. Creative destruction was a term used in Marxism, a socio-political theory, to describe the capitalistic method of economic development. It seeks to link the accumulation and annihilation of wealth. In the Marxist context, creative destruction implies that capitalism destroys and reconfigures economic order by its continual devaluation of wealth to make way for the creation of new wealth, through means of war, dereliction, economic recession, and depression. However, in this day and age, Creative destruction has been adopted to describe the dynamics of economic innovation and advancement. Coined and popularized by the Austrian-American economist Joseph Schumpeter, the phrase bears little likeness to its Marxist predecessor. Schumpeter believed that innovation was a staple of free enterprise and a vital force needed to reach long-term economic growth. In order for an entrepreneurial venture to succeed, it would have to innovate its way to the top. This in turn may destroy other weaker ventures and thus affect anyone caught in the tide. One of Schumpeter's examples of the theory was the impact of railroads during the American Industrial Revolution. In 1949, he writes, "The railroadization of the Middle West, as it was initiated by the Illinois Central, not only meant very good business whilst it was built, but it spelled the death sentence for the old agriculture of the West." Here, he illustrates creative destruction. From the growth and expanse of the technologies of the time, the railroad and the steam engine, jobs were created and communities grew. Though beneficial for the public, it adversely affected other industries, namely the agricultural industry. Another example includes newspapers and print media. Though still widely used and appreciated, a lot of its audience has migrated to the internet. Through the ease of access, low cost, RSS feeds, and online social networking, people found ways to update themselves without having to purchase a newspaper or a magazine. Remember Blockbuster and Hollywood Video? They were those video stores located in the heart of your neighborhood strip mall? Yeah, we nearly forgot to. They are now close to extinction due to the emergence of Redbox kiosks and Netflix movie mailing service. Even those services are soon to be out of date with the growing popularity of video streaming. The internet is the prime catalyst of creative destruction. Its exponential growth in the past decade has drastically changed nearly every industry out there, from video and print stated earlier, to data warehousing with the cloud, and social networking with Facebook. These are all examples of innovation, and every archaic business model falling behind, such as Hollywood Video, will depreciate in value and eventually lose market leverage and ultimately disappear. And now, for our favorite example, drumroll please, Facebook. Now what does Facebook have to do with Schumpeter? This leads to the second part of our video, the law of innovating large firms. With nearly 800 million users, Facebook's scope of influence has a vast market of loyal users. One could say Facebook is a social networking monopoly. Many companies such as Spotify, Hulu, and Nike, to name a few, have pledged allegiance to the social networking mogul. Why? Facebook's reach and entrepreneurial innovation. Recently, Facebook announced a new platform and integration of a timeline, open graph, and lifestyle apps. In a nutshell, timeline shows all of your Facebook activity, past and present. Open graph is an API that allows developers to connect all parts of the web with Facebook. And lifestyle apps are applications designed specifically for a targeted group. The plethora of options and features had never been done before, at least not at this level. In a business perspective, Facebook is doing the right thing by pushing the bar. Strong monopolies that do not bring something new to the table have a tendency to stagnate. Stagnation could lead to parasitic, viral, and bacterial infestation that could destroy the company. Other examples of leading firms that utilize the times to improve their products and services include companies such as Apple, Amazon, and other big names you should have heard about. And if you haven't, we don't even know how you found this video. We greatly appreciate you taking the time to watch our video. From Jeannie No and Michael Doe and Norris Kwan, we are from the future.
Okay. Hopefully you enjoy that. There's a bit of animation and so on. It's a change to lecture notes and me talking. Hopefully it helps. So on the creative destruction, as Joseph Schumpeter's kind of mentioned, it's replacing old technology or things which are old with something which is new, or replacing as such. This YouTube video is quite an old YouTube video anyway. You can see that description of Facebook and so on, like timelines and so on. Most of you kind of take it for granted nowadays. This YouTube video was created back in 2011 or so. Since then, Blockbusters and so on has gone out of business anyhow. So most of these things are still very, very old. Yeah, it's quite old, 10 years old YouTube video. But still, Joseph Schumpeter is still around, covering creative destruction, and it's still a good definition even in this modern world. Yeah, he came up with this theory and so on back in 1930. Yeah, so quite a long time ago, and it's still effective nowadays. Okay, let's switch back to the lecture on definition of entrepreneurship. And we'll cover the last definition, which is the integrated definition. Hopefully it takes a little bit of everything and try to integrate it into one big definition. Hopefully this one big definition will cover most case scenario. So this one big definition, so-called integrated entrepreneurship definition. So entrepreneurship is a dynamic process of vision change as well as creation. It requires an application of energy and passion towards creation and implementation of new ideas and creative and innovative solutions. The main and essential ingredients of entrepreneurship is a willingness to take on calculated risks. Yeah, risks always part of the entrepreneurship's definition. In terms of your time, your equity, as well as your career. The ability to formulate an effective venture team, like I said, one of the most important, team is the most important things you do when it comes to entrepreneurship. You get the right people together, the company will run by itself, yeah, rather than only secondly is the business plan. Yeah, so team is the most, if anything, important decision which you're going to make when it comes to starting a business. So the ability to formulate an effective team, the creative skill to marshal the necessary or the needed resources, as well as the fundamental skill to build a solid business plan. You have to have a vision to recognize an opportunity as well. Whereas where others see chaos and contradiction and confusion, you see opportunity, you see a business plan, and you can formulate teams to implement this as well. Yeah, there should be one other thing. It should also mention that the process is a long, drawn-out process. So you need to have the tenacity to push it towards the end as well. Let me check the time. It's 3:15. Okay, I think we can cover this slide. Okay, let's go into an example. Who or what kind of person creates or even start a startup? Yeah, so let's go through a case study. Google is as good as any. So Page and Brin, back in 1996, while they were still PhD student at Stanford University, Page and Brin was researching in terms of relationship between websites and how to rank the different websites. Back then, back in 1996, I think before most of you were born, search engines do exist. Yeah, we back then we had Yahoo, we had Lycos, we had Asta Vista, we have Ask Jeeves. Most of these companies has gone out of business, or most of this engine has gone out of business since then, except for Yahoo. Yahoo is still around, but Ask Jeeves, I think, has changed to something else. Lycos and Asta Vista has basically collapsed as well. So back then there were a search engine, but search engine were used in very, very simplistic way to rank web pages. So a web page, the more link you have into your web page, what I mean by link is just link from other web page to your web page. The more you have, the higher up in the ranking you are. So Yahoo were using the number of links as well. So people can cheat on this by creating website which has only link pointing to your website. By creating more of these websites, you can increase your link. What Google did, which differ from Yahoo and the very basic search engine, was they rank page by giving more weighting to certain web page if other high ranking web page link to them. So they basically give weighting to different linkage to web page. So for example, if you have like Wiki pointing to your web page, or I don't know, maybe Facebook pointing to your web page, if you have these high profile web pages pointing to your web page, you're going to have a higher score compared to just ordinary web page pointing to your web page. Whereas in Yahoo time, any web page count as one score. With Google, they give higher score or higher weighting for web page which comes from more established companies or more established location. They initially called it this new technology PageRank. So it's just ranking web page, how important web page are or how much weighting you give to certain web page. And later they rename it to Google. They first started research in 96, but in 98 they tried to monetize their technology, this PageRank technology. Initially by raising finance, so this is $100,000 US. Not a huge amount of money, from Andy Bechtolsheim, which is a co-founder, who is a co-founder of Sun Microsystem. This here is very important. Oops. Sun, this name here, Sun, is very important. Sun, which is basically S-U-N. It's a quite, nowadays it's not that famous, but it used to be a very famous computer company. Sun stands for Stanford University Networking. Let me just write that down. Basically, it's an entity of Stanford University. It's a spin-off from Stanford University. It dealt with all the computing and the networking for Stanford University. So these two were the same entity, almost the same entity. This became a separate company later on. A spin-off from the Stanford University itself. Oops, Stanford does not have a D, sorry. Stanford University itself. And then it became a very successful company itself. It created a lot of new technology itself, like the Java programming system. Sun Microsystem actually came out with that new programming language. As well as a lot of the Unix or Linux computer back in the 1980s and the 1990s. They weren't very successful, but eventually they were taken or bought by, I believe Oracle System has bought Sun Microsystems. So it's since then it has disappeared. But it was an entity. It used to be an entity of Stanford University. So the university, or a spin-off of the Stanford University, contributed about 100,000 investment into student from Stanford University, Patient Brin, of the page ranking or the search engine, which later was called Google. So it was part of university, and then another NC university helped it to monetize its technology. Then in the early 1990s, with the help of Stanford University Networking or Sun Microsystem, they introduced Page and Brin to venture capital companies, yeah, so to raise more finance. So university helped their student, but not only that, introduce them to venture capitalists to help them raise more finance. So the university opened doors for Google to raise money with venture capital. Yeah, so Page and Brin went on to raise almost $1 million with a venture capital company called Excite. Yeah, I think nowadays there's also a search engine called Excite. Yeah, it's related to this venture capital themselves. And then in the same year, mid of that year, in June the 7th, 1999, Google, with the help of not only Sun Microsystems, but also the venture capital Excite, by linking them with other venture capital. And they went on to raise another $25 million in terms of venture capital money from Kleiner Perkin Cofield and Breyer, as well as Sequoia Capital in Boston, the state of Boston. That money, that 25 million, were used to develop Google even further, to get more market shares and so on. But back then even, Google was weak, was relatively quite weak. And back then, Yahoo was the Google of its time. Yeah, they were the big companies. Google went to Yahoo asking Yahoo to buy them out, so they can transfer the technology to Yahoo. But Yahoo actually turned Google down. Since then, I mean, Google overtook Yahoo, and now Yahoo has almost disappeared nowadays. Yeah, it's relatively quite small compared to what it was back in the 1990s. So luckily, Yahoo did not buy Google. But then Google went on after using 25 million to develop the technology further, hire more people, and so on. Eventually, they went on to list themselves on the stock market. So Google IPO, or initial public offering, in 2004. The company offered almost 20 million shares at around $85 per share, which gives Google a market capitalization of $23 billion. Yeah. Back in, I believe this is 2015, not currently, so maybe it's 2015. Google was worth 363 billion. Yeah. Nowadays, Google worth a lot more than that. Google has changed name. Now its parent company is called Alphabet. Market cap now is over $1 billion. So let's check on Alphabet's market cap now. Alphabet cap. So today it is September the 14th. So on September the 13th, that's yesterday, Alphabet was worth $2 trillion US. $2 trillion US. That's a lot of money. So over a very short, relatively quite short period of time, from 1996 when they first started their research, and when they really get out and do some financing, that's in the year 1999, 1998, 1999. So basically, just over 20 years, they went from almost nothing into a company which is currently worth $2 trillion, almost $2 trillion US. So 20 years ago, they were just PhD students. And now I think both Page and Prince still own more than 51% of the companies. They still have control if they wanted control. So that for them, their net worth is more than $1 trillion US. So if they still own around sort of like the majority of the shares, 50% or so, their net worth is about $1 trillion US themselves. But we need to be careful though. If we only, especially when it comes to entrepreneurship, we only look at cases, successful cases like Google and Facebook and Amazon and so on, we can potentially make some mistakes. Yeah. So the concept of survivorship bias, yeah, can kick in. So what is survivorship bias? So this is a misconception that every human tends to suffer from. Yeah. In general, we tend to be attracted to success stories, such as the Yahoo or the Google or the Amazon. In general, we tend to read, if you want to be successful, we will read books from very successful people like Page and Brin or Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk and so on. But sometimes by learning from the success, we can make potential mistakes. The issue when we only learn from successful people is that when failure becomes invisible, which we will see in a moment, the difference between failure and success may become invisible as well. So let's look at this example of this bomber during the Second World War. So during the Second World War, the British and the American, to slow down the German army and so on, they bombed industry complexes in Germany. By damaging the production capability of Germany, it can reduce the amount of weapons as well as tanks and guns and so on supplied to the German army. So they would try to bomb the industry in Germany. But the issue with bombing Germany industry is that every time their bombers fly over Germany, a lot of these bombers get shot down. So these are basically where the bullet holes of the British and the American planes, where they get shot. Yeah. So in general, majority of the planes which returned from Germany, there were lots of bullet holes in the wingtips towards the center of the fuselage. and towards the tail, there were a lot of bullet holes. But then there are places where there's not much in terms of bullet holes, like this particular area here, and then this particular area here, as well as around the cockpit. There wasn't really that many bullet holes around the cockpit, or even the engines. Yeah, the two engines, propellers and engine itself. So what the military asked, they try to figure out how to increase the number of bombers returning from Germany. So the general in UK and American generals, they asked the scientists to, or the military, to look at the bombers themselves that had returned from the enemy territory and record all these bullet holes where the planes has taken the majority of the damage itself. And they see the bullet holes in these particular areas, like wingtips and tail and towards the center of the fuselage, but less so in terms of the center of the wings, as well as the engine and the cockpit overall. Then they basically try to figure out where to put extra, because the things with planes is that they have to fly, so that you need to keep the weight down. If the plane's too heavy, it's going to use up too much fuel. And not only that, it might be too heavy to even fly as a whole. So over and over again, they saw a lot of bullet holes in certain areas accumulate along the wings, around the tail gunners, as well as down the center of the body. So the question is, consider all these information which you see here on this particular plane here, where would you put the extra armor? You cannot put a lot of armor because, like I said, if it's too heavy, the plane might not even fly. And not only that, it's going to use a lot of fuel. So you might not have enough fuel to fly all the way over to Germany. So where would you put the extra bulletproof armor? Let's do some class participation. Okay, we'll have a show of hands. Yeah, don't forget there's this hand raise button here. As I name different part of the plane, please stick up your hands. Yeah, where you would want to put the bulletproof armor on this plane. Okay, so let me just look. You can see here, I raised my hand. So let's see, what do we do? We will say, question, you want to put armor, hands up those who want to put armor on the tail, this region here. Hands up, those who want to put it in the tail. Let me check to see how many votes. One person. Okay, one person on the tail. Hands up those who want to put it on the wingtips. So around this region here, as well as here. So these two regions, wingtips. One person, same person, Khoi Vang, who just lowered. Hands up who wants to put the armor in the main fuselage, this particular area here. No one? I don't hear anyone raising their hands. Oh, actually quite a few. Five people raise their hand. No, not five, 7 people raise their hand. Okay, let's move on. Hands up who wants to put armor in these regions. So cockpit, the engine, and this area here where there's only one bullet hole. And this area here where there's only one bullet hole. Yeah. So 3 area, cockpit, engine, and this center area on the wings. Hands up. Let's see. 5 people, 6 people. Okay, the answer is the area where you don't see much in terms of bullet hole. So this area here, that's where the fuel tank was. Yeah, these 2 areas where the fuel tank was. If there were too many bullet holes in the fuel tank, yeah, the plane would have gone down. Or if there are bullet holes in the engine, yeah, the engine would stop. And if there were bullet holes in the cockpit, the pilot would have been killed. The thing is, if there were too many bullet holes here, the plane would have not returned to the UK. And it would crash in Germany. Same thing here, if it was shot in the cockpit, the pilot would have been dead and the plane would have gone down over Germany. Yeah, the issue which you see in this plane, these are the plane which return to the to England. Yeah. What data was missing was the plane which got shot down in Germany. Yeah, you were collecting only data from planes which returned from Germany. So in other words, planes which were shot in these areas, which are not that vital, wingtips and tail, could survive the journey back to England. Whereas planes which shot in these areas, the fuel tanks, the engine, and the cockpit, they crash in Germany. Yeah, you did not have the data. You do not have the data because the data has basically crashed in Germany. So it's easy to make this mistake. By learning about planes, survived planes, which comes back to the UK or England, you are making a mistake. Yeah? You are biases on the survivors. But by analyzing survivors, you are making a mistake. You're missing the data needed to make that good judgment. You need to put armor where there were no bullet holes because these were the vital part of the planes. But the planes which were vital, the data basically already crashed. You do not have that data because these planes were crashed over in Germany. Yeah, the data which you have, or the plane which survive, are basically were shot only in area where planes do not go down if they were shot in these areas. So it is easy to do, to make that mistakes. Everyone make that mistakes by reading and learning from the Yahoo, sorry, not the Yahoo, but the Google and the Facebook and the Amazon, or reading books from Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or Elon Musk. You can make a lot of these mistakes. There's the so-called survivorship bias. It's likely to bungle many of your everyday or day-to-day assumption. Simply put, survivorship bias is a tendency to focus on survivors instead of what you would call the non-survivors or the plane we shot over Germany, depending on the situation. Sometimes that means you tend to focus more on the living instead of the dead, where it's important to focus on the dead itself. Or the winners, like the Elon Musk and the Brin and Page and Brin and the Mark Zuckerberg, instead of the losers, like the Lycos and the Asta Vista and the Ask Jeeves, or the losing search engine, on how they actually lost out to Google, and more also on the success instead of the failed companies. So not only you fail to recognize that's what is missing or might have held important information, you fail to recognize that there are missing information at all. You know, you fail to recognize that the shot down plane was actual data which you need, if anything, more important data which you need. So be careful with that. We should not all learn if we want to be successful, we should not all learn from successful companies or from the Elon Musk and the Mark Zuckerberg and the Bill Gates. We need to figure out how companies fail in the first place. Yeah, and if anything, those information is a lot more important overall. Yeah, so we'll try to not to make that so many of these kind of mistakes, and analyze how Google does it or how Facebook does it, but we'll try to look at unsuccessful companies as well. So at the IU, International University, in general, or even at the National University, or even in Vietnam in general, Vietnam government nowadays, they have these so-called startup nation policies now. A lot more money and investment are being pushed into startups overall. But you kind of seen that. I've kind of seen that. I've been teaching at the National University, International University for, I think, since 2014. So it's about 6-7 years in total. Back in 2014, 2015, there wasn't that many competition at the IU about startups. Nowadays, there's 2 or 3 competition like masterclass, and nowadays I see there's a lot of these social entrepreneurship kind of entrepreneur competition on a regular basis. So the university allow you to compete, but not only that, there are prize money as well. Yeah? Not the same kind of prize money as maybe as Google. I mean, Google managed to win $100,000 US from Stanford University networking. Nowadays, IU, International University, are giving away maybe $10,000 or something like that, but it's still quite a substantial amount. There's a lot more support nowadays around the university. Money given to you to help you with your startups. There's a lot more support overall, even compared to the Google and Stanford University itself. Not only at the International University, but the National University and the members of the National University, there's always 2 or 3 competition and prize money. There's a lot of money available. Yeah? So in Bách Khoa or the National University, such as the University of Science and Technology or Natural Science and so on, there's always these competition. There's always around sort of like $10,000 US of prize money and so on. So hence nowadays there's a lot more support. Yeah, so you not see much in terms of difference even when comparing to Google back when Page and Print did the PhD. They are support at university, and they are prize money to help you support you to make your startup successful. I too have been doing it in terms of investing in students. So this company EduNet, you probably kind of seen it logo quite a few places and so on. It's one of my more successful companies focusing on IoT, artificial intelligence, and so on. We're helping a lot of clients include VNPT, Victel, FPT, governments from Tây Ninh province to Dinh Giang province and so on. We do a lot of these big projects for governments and provinces and so on. So I started with one of my students, Trong Tan Boom. I invested in $15,000 US in this startup with him. And since then, it's has been very successful at various different area itself. Yeah, we launched various different websites and so on. Mr. Vu was an MBA student in finance. I taught him MBA, one of the classes in finance. Is International University of the National University. He has a bachelor degree in software engineer, but he did his MBA at the business school. So this is one of the more successful of my various different companies. I have quite a few different companies. Another example of student from International University, Miss Tang Kim Thong. I launched Aura with her and one of her colleagues who recently passed away, also another IU student. This company focused more on business services and corporate services, such as legal, accountancy, and so on. Miss Fong here was doing her bachelor degree in finance at the International University, one of my students from one of my classes. She was interested in finance and so on, so hence we launched this company, this startup. We basically had about investment about $15,000 US. In most cases, in Vietnam, startup does not require a lot of money. Websites changed since we changed this to .com. You're interested? There are internships in these companies if you're interested in joining these companies. Let's change edunet.com, not edunet.vn, which since changed the domain name. In general, when it comes to domain name, the .com is a lot harder to obtain. So it took us a while to obtain the .com domain name. But like I said, the issue with survivorship bias and so on, not all companies I invested in and not all students I invested in at the IU have become successful. So here's a not so successful company. Another one, bachelor student from Miss Long An. We try to launch this design companies, focusing on not only security testing, but also designing 3D printed components and so on. So the investment was a lot less, luckily. We managed to close it down and so on. So it was focusing on high-tech startup, focusing on digital manufacturing, such as 3D printing, CNC, security testing, and prototyping, and so on. It has since been shut down. So not all companies has been successful. Some companies I've set up, a lot of companies I've set up have failed. But that's the issue with startups. The risks involved with startups, you need to be able to manage the risks yourself. So kind of three examples. One did quite well, which is Edunet. Aura did not do too well. And Tehebade, basically, we have since closed this particular entity down. So the main lesson I learned from this three company here, and the main lesson you guys need to learn from these companies here, not all companies you set up will succeed. Some of the more successful businesses from some of the more famous people like Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates and Elon Musk and so on, they're pretty much the same in the sense that not everything they do became successful. Yeah, so there are a lot of companies which Google has since shut down. Same with Elon Musk and Bill Gates as well. Not everything they do is successful. So the trick is, or the way to reduce your risk is you do quite a few different strategies, similar to what I did as well. I did quite a few strategies the more you do, the more likely you're going to succeed. Yeah, there will be a few failure along the way, but you need to be able to plan failure within your business plan. You need to be able to cope with failure as well. That's why instead of one company, I try to set up many different companies. I know many will fail, but the strategy is I plan failure into my business plan as well. So there's a lot of supports and so on. And there's lots of example where IU students, whether it's from bachelor degree or MBA degree or and so on, has helped me or other companies to start their own companies as well. So I've invested in students at the IU to start their own business. I failed with a student at the IU starting their business, and I have succeeded with IU student starting their business as well. There's a lot of resources, there's a lot of finance and so on at the IU or even at the National University or even in Vietnam with Vietnam's startup nation policies and so on. There's a lot of opportunities, not only that, lots of money to invest in, a lot of competition to invest in, especially with this particular course itself. Running out of time now. In this course itself, by the end of this course, you guys will have website, mobile apps, business plan. You have a lot of material, a lot of prototypes. So hence entering a lot of these competition, which exists every year at the IU. There's always 2 or 3 of these competition appear every year. And if you enter these competition with a website and mobile apps and business plan, you're way ahead compared to other entries in these competitions itself. You'll have an advantage even just by doing this course itself. Okay, I think I'm about running out of time anyhow. I talked too much on these examples as such. Any question from anyone? Okay, if there's no question, I will see you next week. We'll talk. I think we're moving towards entrepreneurship and culture. I think the next topic is culture. So next week we will start talking about how Vietnamese culture affect entrepreneurships and startup. Okay. If there is no question, I will see you next week. Okay. Don't forget, this class is recorded. I will make the recording available as soon as I can. As soon as I receive the recording, I will upload it like onto YouTube like last time.